Star Wars. Arguably, one of the biggest franchises in the world. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who hasn't at least heard the name. At best, I consider myself a casual Star Wars fan. I've seen all 9 mainline movies, a few spin-offs, and that's really it. The franchise didn't seem to grab me like it did for many others. While video games were always my favorite form of entertainment, I'll be honest, I don't remember hearing about this game until well after its release. With only a casual appreciation for the movies, and most of my favorite games on different systems, I didn't know just how dedicated its following became. With that said, there was one series I never actually tried, a series that I've always heard nothing but love for. Enter Knights of the Old Republic, made by BioWare, known mostly for their Mass Effect and Dragon Age series. This game was released in 2003 to praise from critics and fans alike. While I was busy playing games on the PS2 and Game Boy, KOTOR was apparently making the rounds with the fans of Star Wars on Xbox and PC. It was never actually on my radar. Hell, I'd never even heard about the game until about a decade later. That's how out of the Star Wars loop I was. Now in 2024, I figured it was about time to try this game in all its glory. I would be lying if I said I wasn't curious to see what all the love for the game was about. Couple that with the hype surrounding Saber Interactive's KOTOR remake on the horizon, I wanted to finally hop into this universe and see what made it tick. I was not prepared. I went in expecting a game that was beloved, but showing its age in a variety of different ways. I had half wondered if the love for this game was just people wearing rose-tinted glasses. While it has certainly aged, it does not detract at all from the beast this game is known to be. In fact, I would even argue that KOTOR single-handedly gave me an interest in the Star Wars franchise that I never thought possible. To the point I found myself watching a lot of lore videos and just deep diving into the Legends lore of the series. Rest in peace, Legends lore. Now, let's talk about the game. What makes it function, the story, and just what parts of the game captured me. It's time to embark on the wild ride that is Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic. KOTOR released in the US in July 2003. That's 21 years ago now. This game is old enough to drink. That's a scary thought. Due to its age, it's always a good idea to remember that some things in it might not have aged very well over time. We've since had over 2 decades of time for game development to evolve. There are 2 things in particular that stick out like a sore thumb. One is, understandably, the graphics. The other is the gameplay. Now, they're not unbearable by any means. In fact, they now give it a retro style that we come to see retro games as. You can actually see the amount of polygons in certain objects and locations, not to mention how barren some areas can be due to the limitations in development at the time. When I think Star Wars, I think space, ship battles, aliens, and mystic samurai called Jedi in a galaxy far away. This game definitely wants to show that off, and what better way to do that than the iconic lightsaber itself? Yes, you can be a Jedi in this game. In fact, the game forces you to become a Jedi whether you want to or not. We'll talk about the gameplay and story in a bit. For now, let's talk about the look and style of the game. Obviously, being a 21-year-old game, the art style and graphics are about as well as you can expect from the early 2000s. The characters actually have proper proportions, so it's not as outlandish as Final Fantasy VII with Cloud's Popeye arms. Basically, the original Xbox and PS2 era of games. The iconic lightsaber shows up, as well as various force powers like force lightning and such. You can tell it's a Star Wars game. The game even starts with the iconic Star Wars yellow text scroll from the beginning exposition. The Star Wars vibe is here and prevalent. While the same can't be said for the graphics, this was way back when studios were trying to work with new age hardware at the time. KOTOR wasn't just a PC game, it also released for Xbox. So when you see visual glitches, or the fact that you can run into nothing, you understand where it came from. You know what running in place reminds me of? That's right, the gameplay. KOTOR was made during the early era of BioWare. Around that time, the studio was known for their narrative genius, not so much for their gameplay. Add to that the game being from 2003 and you have yourself a very old style of gaming. The gameplay revolves around a few things: combat, traveling the worlds, and the RPG elements like dialogue, choices and consequences, leveling up, and items with stats. We've got a bit to talk about here, so buckle up. This being a narrative-driven game under the Star Wars umbrella, there's a lot to unpack here. Dialogue as well as making choices with consequences are pretty big in this game. I wouldn't put it on the level of, say, Fallout New Vegas, but there are still quite a few choices you can make in the game. The choices are given in a multitude of ways. You can find them in dialogue during the main quest, during a side quest, randomly finding information related to a quest, or even the order in which you take the main quest. There are quite a few ways KOTOR tries to make this journey your own. Dialogue itself will have you in conversations with various NPCs throughout your journey. You'll be given choices of what to say and do during these exchanges as well. These choices will help you to define your character in various instances. These instances will be more black and white styles of choices. Basically, dialogue options that will make you closer to either the light side or the dark side of the Force. When I say black and white, I mean it's basically a good choice or a bad choice. There are times you can get through an entire conversation and not have the needle move in either direction. You can kind of call this more of a gray choice in the dialogue, but you'll find it nearly impossible to stay that way. The dialogue options are a mix of great depth as well as pretty light on options. I said before that depending on how you do the main story can give you more information during conversations. Stuff like finding out some information during an investigation for a trial will give you more things to say and question. Other things like which order you visit each planet will also give you different dialogue on the last planet you visit. Mainly, you see some stuff during your travels that informs your character of something, and that becomes more dialogue on the final planet. There's a good amount of depth here, where the game rewards players for exploring and taking on side quests. That being said, there are also times where I've come across just 2 options to choose from. That does pop up quite a few times. It's likely so the game can keep on progressing forward rather than keeping you in dialogue for an extra 10 minutes. Sometimes those 2 options are just flavor text, and sometimes they're more black and white. What I mean by flavor text is that they might say something different, but will achieve the same response regardless of which you choose. Something for more role-playing purposes, while also giving your character some amount of voice. It's the illusion of choice in that instance. That's not a bad thing, but just something to expect. Inversely, there are also times where you not only have more than just 2 dialogue choices to make, but they can get to the point where you need to scroll the list to read them all. Pretty much every time this shows up is when a lot of options available are essentially on a knockout list. Once you click them, they go away and you end up on the same screen with all the other choices, sort of like a grocery list. Once you pick the item, you cross it off. These choices are typically just something involved with the conversation at the moment. These are more inquisitive in nature and are there to further the player's knowledge and world building of the game as opposed to truly continuing the conversation. You can get through all dialogue very quickly with just the ones that do continue further, and I'm sure that speedrunners take full advantage of that. The main takeaway for all this is that dialogue has some interesting ways it works. It can get beefier the more you play and explore, or it can stay the way it was just by going through the main quest and only the main quest. It's the player's choice on how they take it. It's your journey after all. Now, let's look at combat. Combat in KOTOR is like an old school mix of real-time and strategy. It's all real-time, but you can pause combat to issue orders to your party of 3. Your party consists of your character and 2 allies you meet on your journey. You have quite a few options to choose from. All the orders you give are involved with either buffing yourself and allies or attacking your enemies in different ways. All attacks are shown on a red bar above selectable enemy heads. You have 3 things you can choose from. Going from left to right, you have attacks, force abilities, which are restricted to Jedi, and grenades. The buffs are at the bottom right corner in the blue bar. Going from left to right again, you have force buffs, restricted to Jedi, healing items, buff items, and setting up explosive mines. There's a lot of things you can click on for each selection, and you can scroll up and down to reveal more options in each category. As you choose anything to do, you'll see at the bottom of the screen another bar. This will set up all the actions in a queue for your character to use over time as they run through them. I found it easier to queue all the actions up with the game paused and then letting everything run its course. The main job is then keeping an eye on the battle as it progresses and see about keeping your allies alive while taking everyone else out. You know, the basic premise of combat. Even with knowing how the game runs and functions, it can be difficult at times. I've come across a few encounters where I ended up losing a few times in a row. I would go back and change up strategy a bit, and then it would end up trivializing the battle. I would go from losing everyone to losing nobody in a few different occasions, and this was on normal difficulty. I can't imagine what it would be like on harder difficulties. As I got further into the game, I had a group full of Jedi. I would set them all to start attacking and stunning enemies to keep a good crowd control going. As it turns out, some enemies are strong enough to take on your entire team solo. That made things pretty tough when you find out they also had allies with them. It would sometimes turn into a battle of attrition. We're talking every skill in use. Someone keeping the main boss's attention, one working on crowd control with stunning and taking them on, and one for crowd control with a heavy use of group healing. If that didn't work, I ended up changing strategy to just straight up bullying single enemies until it was just down to the boss remaining. That tended to get the job done pretty well. Doesn't matter what the game is, all enemies are weak to bullying. There are all types of engagements you'll come across in KOTOR. Enemies with guns, lightsabers, swords, yes, swords, grenades, force powers, the works. Everything you can do, the enemies can also do, except placing mines on the ground. I've never seen them do that. That's not to say you won't run into mines though. Those things will hit you when you least expect them. You need to raise your character's awareness to spot them in general. Even then, you might not spot some. Let's talk about the various types of combat styles in the game. You obviously have the iconic Jedi, but we'll talk about them later. When you first start the game, you enter the character creator. You're given a choice of 3 starting classes: Scoundrel, Scout, and Soldier. They all have different starting gear and stats. Once you choose what you want, you can then choose the face of your character. Next is choosing what attributes you'd like to focus on. You're given 30 to spend now, with all the stats starting at 8 points each. You can raise each stat to a maximum of 18 right now. You have Strength, a stat that works best with melee weapons like swords and lightsabers to give you a better chance to hit your enemies, as well as do more damage. Dexterity raises your skills with blasters and grenades, while also raising your defense and the chances an enemy will miss you. Constitution controls how much HP you get with each level up. Intelligence gives you more or less points into what you can spend level ups on. Wisdom increases the points a character will have for their force powers, and even helps with saving throws. And oh geez, I forgot to talk about how the game is based on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. Yeah, we'll come back to that. The final attribute is Charisma. This helps with force powers. Somehow. I don't know. But it also helps with persuasion checks. That's all 6 attribute stats right there. All of these work in tandem during gameplay in a variety of ways. This is where the Dungeons & Dragons style of gameplay comes in. Everything you do in-game is done with virtual dice rolls in the background, essentially a random number generator acting as dice rolls. This happens for both your character and allies, as well as the enemies. These dice rolls control how often you can hit an enemy, how often you can dodge a hit from an enemy. Can you stun an enemy? Can they stun you? There's a lot that happens really fast, and you never actually see a dice rolling at all. Heck, this is very apparent when it comes to reading stats and abilities on certain gear, like the Jedi's lightsaber for instance. You can put certain crystals in them to make them stronger, and you can spot it saying stuff like 1d6 and some such. This is basically a 6-sided die that gets rolled in the background to see if the effect of the crystal will land or not. Pretty in-depth stuff for a game from 2003. So right after you're finished selecting your character's attributes, you come across the skills section. These are more utility-oriented and pretty self-explanatory. Computer use makes hacking computers cost less while letting you hack higher difficulty computers. The rest tend to work in a similar way in what they help to control. But you also have demolitions for grenades and mines, stealth for, well, stealth, awareness for spotting hidden things from farther away, persuade, we'll come back to that later, repair for repairing droids, security for unlocking things, and finally treat injury for using healing items. All of these skills start out at 0 points each. You're given 20 to distribute between all of them now, but some take more points to level than others. Computer use, for instance, takes 2 points to level each time. Treat injury will only take 1 point to grow each time. Why does it work like this? Who knows? If I had to take a guess, it's probably because there's a ton of computers to hack in the game. They really want it to cost, since most people would see that as one of the obvious best skills to put points into. Moving on, you're now introduced to feats. Various physical and mental abilities and passive abilities that your character can use. There are a lot of them. Just stuff like proficiencies in what weapons they can wield, some different styles, and even special attacks from melee weapons and blasters. Other feats are just straight up passive buffs, like giving your character more health every level. And that's even retroactive. Retroactive meaning that even if you get the feat on the final level, you still get the buff for every level before it. Definitely glad they did this, as it doesn't force you to get certain feats early in order to make the most of them. There are a lot of times you'll end up leveling up and getting a message saying you've unlocked new feats automatically. They're essentially stages like when you choose your starting class, when you become a Jedi, and after you level Jedi enough on 2 separate occasions. Basically, free feats you don't have to put any points into. They're mostly there for reading purposes rather than giving you the choice to put points into them. Finally, you create your name and you're off to the races. Character creation in a nutshell. Now, there was a reason I wanted to go over a bit of the starting classes. The reason for that is I wanted to tell you just how useless they end up being compared to Jedi. So, you wanted to make a silver-tongued, blaster-slinging scoundrel at the beginning of the game like me? Well, what if I told you there were so many enemies that can put on shields that automatically deflect blaster fire? What if I told you it's basically useless to fire blaster shots at a Jedi since they'll simply deflect 90% of them? Alright, maybe you just wanted to use a sword instead of a lightsaber with no force abilities. Well, I hope you enjoy hard mode, because you're getting slaughtered by every Jedi while running up to everything with no force buffs. Sure, you have the Jedi passive buffs, but it's still tougher like that. Hey, at least you can hit Jedi now, right? The game is very heavily skewed towards making Jedi incredibly strong. Yes, it's likely possible to do everything with just a blaster or sword, but it'll be more difficult as you can't just brute force your way through your problems. Speaking of the swords, this is the only time I think I've seen, or at least recall seeing, any normal swords in the Star Wars universe. It's normally blasters and lightsabers, isn't it? They do at least give us an explanation as to why these swords don't just melt immediately against a lightsaber. So yeah, those are the weak points to the other styles of combat. Let me explain just how overpowered Jedi are in KOTOR. Have you ever walked into a combat engagement and just froze all of your opponents, leaving them open to decimate and trivialize the encounter? Well, Jedi can do that. Have you ever used a single-use heal item and watched the number you hold go down? Jedi can heal themselves and the rest of the team with 3 different levels of heal, costing only a bit of force points. Have you ever looked at your sword and realized just how worthless at ranged attacks it is? Well, Jedi can throw their lightsaber and hit multiple enemies with it, coming right back to them. Have you ever... I think you get the idea. Everything you can do with blasters or swords, Jedi can do better. Those other ways of play just get absolutely dunked on by simply being a Jedi. You can be stunned by enemy Jedi as well, but being a Jedi will give you higher resistance to avoid that in general. Jedi are just simply better. There's no other way to look at it, honestly. Now, I did say the game also forces you to be a Jedi. That does mean you get the resistance buffs regardless of your playstyle. While that is true, most of this conversation wasn't actually about your character in question. This was more about your choice of allies. It's just far better to bring in Jedi companions rather than those who can only use blasters and swords. They have no force resistances, so they have a much higher chance of being stunned in some way. Not to mention all of the natural deterrents of using blasters and having the rounds just straight up deflected. And that's a shame, really, because that means a good amount of people will likely end up going through with only a few characters like I did. A lot of these characters are interesting and have good writing behind them. Some of their voice acting is really well done. But we'll talk about the various characters later. KOTOR is an RPG that has a leveling system in it. The max level is 20, and it takes quite a while to actually hit that number. You get experience from combat and questing typically. You might not even hit level 20 until the final zone of the game. It all depends on how you play the game. Every level gives you 2 options. You can either let the game decide what skills, perks, and stats to give you, or you can decide them for yourself. This works the same way with your allies, as they level up as well. Each level will give you points to add in different categories, and each level will give you different categories to put points into. You might see one category and nothing else, or you might see all of them. I'm sure there's a very specific way it's done, but I never really bothered trying to figure it out, mostly because once I saw that level, it was over and done with. Considering max level is 20, that means you will have a build by that point, rather than a jack of all trades, master of all. This isn't Skyrim, where you can max out everything with enough time. This is more old school, where there's a max amount of points you'll get to work with. It all depends on your playstyle. The game also has puzzles that you'll come across from time to time. These puzzles go from trying to figure out how to move objects in unique ways, to that of math. Straight up math. Though I'm sure a lot of people will just look up the answers on the internet. I'm proud to say I only did that for a couple. The puzzles themselves can definitely be tough, but given enough trial and error on ones that require you to pass, you'll get it eventually. There are other puzzles where they don't end in a game over, so whether you pass or fail only matters at that moment. Fail, and you can still move on, so no worries in the end. While puzzles aren't necessarily everyone's cup of tea, I can attest to them changing up the monotony of just straight up dialogue and combat all the time. Some definitely feel out of left field, and others feel like they have too many moving parts. But nothing a quick Google search can't help you overcome quickly. Remember when I said how the story changes a bit depending on the order you visit the worlds? Yeah, in true Star Wars fashion, we visit multiple worlds. You just have to wait until you acquire your ship, the Ebon Hawk. Once you have it, it's just a matter of finding, oh, there's a lot of rooms in here. Sorry, you'll just have to find the cockpit with the map in it. Select the map, and it's then you simply pick the world you wish to fly to. An animation will play with you leaving your current location, and another when you arrive at your destination. But wait, you've just been spotted by the Sith. Hope you're ready to man the turret and take out all the enemy ships flying around you while the Ebon Hawk seemingly decides to stay in one place. Seriously, this ship was stated to be one of the fastest out there, and yet the Sith ships are literally doing laps around it. I guess it's mostly this way due to engine and time limitations or something. Regardless, you just aim the turret at the ships and fire the weapon. You do have to aim, and I do recommend either aiming ahead of where the enemy are flying, or waiting until they're basically just flying directly at you, taking their own pot shots. It's then that they're easiest to hit. That is, unless they're too far underneath where the turret can aim. Then, it's absolute BS until they fly a bit higher. These Sith are pretty stupid. All they would have to do is simply fly underneath the Ebon Hawk and they would win. It can be quite difficult to aim your shots properly. I played this on PC with keyboard and mouse. Aiming with the mouse was pretty much useless for me. I didn't bother looking in the settings to see if there was a way to change them, but the mouse moves your aim so little it's borderline unusable. However, WASD on the keyboard is available to use and is far superior. That said, it's still pretty crap as just tapping one of the buttons moves the aim a tremendous amount. It's hypersensitive. Anyway, there's only a chance that these space dogfights can happen. Otherwise, you have another cutscene where you go into light speed to your destination. You can tell whether you have a dogfight or not based on the start of the music of the cutscene itself. You could consider that to be a minigame of sorts, mainly because it's not the main style of gameplay, that being the combat on planets and such. But there are two more minigames on top of that. There's swoop racing, and there's a card game called Pazak. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Let's start with swoop racing. Unlike its name, you don't actually do a swooping motion. More like you're a drag racing car, but Star Wars-like pod racers. Funnily enough, calling it racing is also a bit weird since you never actually see another vehicle. No, it's all time-based, quite literally like drag racing, just without another vehicle alongside you. So, you have a swoop bike, as they call it, and you go from the starting line to the finish line in the fastest time you can. The racing part is predetermined times you have to surpass. These times are made by NPCs, but again, you'll never actually see them get made. So while you're going from beginning to end, you have to shift gears at the proper times, dodge obstacles, and hit these speed pads. Doing the combination of all three will have you hitting your times faster and faster. You know, I swear though, they change up the courses with each race tier. There are a total of 3 different race courses you can do. One is a story-based contest, the other 2 you have to pay to enter each time. Sometimes you might come across a time that's harder to beat, in which case, you have to pay again to enter. Each time you win, your character comes back into the main room to cheering and applause. Inversely, if you lose, even by milliseconds, everyone acts like you're the worst swoop racer ever in the history of swoop racing. There is no in-between. As a wise ass once said, if you ain't first, you're last. Ricky Bobby. This was actually quite fun for me. Riding the swoop bike and getting faster and faster while weaving between speed pads felt pretty good. It was costly if I lost, but nobody has to know I have the power of save and load, right? Finally, the last minigame. The card game Pazak. This was an interesting game to play. It was actually quite easy, and I never lost once. Nope, never. Not a single time. So the game plays like this. You have your own deck of cards. You can get more cards via questing and purchasing from others. One of the people you can buy them from was pretty shady on the planet Manan, just standing there, looking like some kind of dealer, if you know what I mean. When you look at the cards, you'll see numbers as well as positive or negative signs with them, even some with both. Positive is addition, while negative is subtraction. Choose 10 cards, and you're ready to play. The game is pretty simple overall. Out of your 10 card deck, the game will randomly select 4 cards you can play. You'll see a yellow card pop up with a number on it. You can add to that number, subtract that number, end your turn, or something called stand. Ending your turn will allow a yellow card to appear on your opponent's side of the board. Then, they can do any of those 4 options. They'll likely end their turn, so it'll go back to you and then continue the game. Hitting stand will end your play for the rest of the match. The goal here is to reach the total number of 20 without going over. Closest to 20 wins. Addition is great if you're close, but don't want to risk the next yellow card putting you over. Subtraction is for if you accidentally go over, but you can save yourself from losing the round. First to win 3 rounds wins the match. So there's a funny little extra tidbit to know about the cards here. There are cards that are clearly far superior than the regular positive or negative cards. These cards are essentially both. They have the same amount of numbers, and you can pick whether they're positive or negative. It adds an extra dimension to the game, but in so doing, makes the solid positive or negative cards useless by comparison. Seriously, if you have a plus and minus 2, why would you choose another 2 that's plus or minus instead? One type works one way, the other works either way. It's clearly better in every way. Just make a deck filled to the brim with those combo cards and you're golden. When I first learned the game, it seemed pretty easy overall. I understood how it worked and won my first match. Left it to play the rest of the game for a while. Then I tried playing again and lost like 20 times in a row. I swear, this game just wants me to lose money. Oh, that's right. Playing the game against NPCs is all wagers of credits, the in-game currency. so be prepared to win or lose a lot of money whenever you feel like gambling it all away. And that's the overall gameplay of the game. I enjoy it, but it's not without flaws. It's got plenty of them. The game can be tough at times, but nothing a change of strategy can't fix. Not to mention, it's still got a few mini games to add to the mix, making the game feel even bigger. Plenty of challenge to be had here, as well as never being truly out of your league, just so long as you're willing to change strategy sometimes. Not to mention, the puzzles you come across in the game really make you think. Now, with the gameplay out of the way, let's talk about the setting. This is Star Wars. Not only is Star Wars set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, this is even older than that. Like thousands of years before even the prequel movies. This is during a time some dubbed the Old Republic. You know the Republic from the movies? Yeah, it's the same one. And apparently it's been around for 15,000 years before even that. Jeez. The lore for Star Wars is huge. At the time KOTOR takes place, Darth Revan was in power and close by was his apprentice Malak. Now, with Darth Revan defeated, Darth Malak takes his place as the Dark Lord. Malak and Revan, two Jedi turned Sith, light side to dark side, good to evil, you get the idea. With Revan out of the picture, now the Republic has to contend with Darth Malak. You, the player, wake up on a ship in space, the Endar Spire, and it's under attack, and thus begins the game. With the stage set, let's talk about the overall narrative of the game. Honestly, the biggest aspect of the game that makes KOTOR such a beloved game. Here we go. This here is your spoiler warning. We are about to talk about the game's narrative on a timeline basis. This will be a loose summary, but I will be talking about some major story beats. If you don't want to be spoiled on arguably one of the best Star Wars games, here's your time to dip out now. Other than that, here we go. Knights of the Old Republic is best known for the story and narrative it tells. Take the setting of Star Wars and add in the old school BioWare writing, and you have yourself one hell of a story to experience. From what the story tries to convey to the player, to how the dialogue is done, and all the ways to how your choices matter in how certain story beats play out. This is BioWare to a T. Things you come across are connected in various ways through the companions you travel with. This is done by having you come across your allies in various parts of your playthrough. After you recruit them, they have connections to certain planets that you'll end up visiting. This is where their companion quests come into play. Some companion quests actually require you to have that person in your party in order to progress the main quest itself. An example of this is Karth. He's not tied to a single planet for his personal quest. His quest is tied to the main quest. Alternatively, Zalbar's quest is tied to Kashyyyk, his home world. However, he's not required to progress the story on the planet itself. I ended up taking him due to me wanting to experience the story as full as I could for this playthrough. While I didn't end up completing everything, I did end up doing a lot from what I can tell. So the story itself is a combination of both linear as well as non-linear. The locations in question aren't linear in how they're progressed, save for a couple story beats in particular. Most of the time, when you arrive at a planet, it's a planet in an order of your choosing. To take that even further, being on the planet itself has a bunch of different areas you can access in a sort of zone-like way rather than a hallway. Because it's done this way, both the main quest, as well as whatever side quests you happen upon, will be in whichever order you find them. You can go to a world like Tatooine and just focus on the main quest, completely disregarding the side quests in general. Doing so will speed up the pace at which you experience the main campaign, but will also keep you away from learning more about the various worlds and the lore. This is all done in a player-controlled manner, giving you agency in how you take your own journey through this game. I did say earlier that there are some places that don't follow this more open style. Those locations are involved with the main quest where you're either forced into something or you're nearing the end of the game. Deviations and NPCs you talk to for side objectives are pretty much non-existent in this way. Outside of these exceptions, the game is surprisingly open to how you plan on going through it. While you start the game on a ship called the Endar Spire, this being one of those linear locations in the game, it's also the tutorial showing you the ins and outs of how to play the game. Combat, interacting with items and objects, and even dialogue. This is what you learn in this part of the game. Kind of expected for it to be more linear since the ship is under attack when you start the game. Sure, there are plenty of games that start you in a more open way, but those don't tend to be very explodey in nature. Those have exposition and generally slower pacing. This has exposition and the fact that you're under attack in a ship in space where no one can hear you scream. After you escape, you then head to 2 other planets in a specific order that you're forced upon. This is where you could say the game is linear. However, this is essentially to introduce you to the game's setting. Add to that the way in which the story leads you into both those worlds, and there's a reason for it. This is the introductory section of the main story. 1 tutorial ship followed by 2 planets. All of it is teaching you the ropes, as well as getting your character into place to continue the main story. One thing I want to point out quickly is that the first world you visit after you escape the ship will be unavailable after you leave it. If you're a completionist, I would highly recommend you do everything while you're there before leaving for that reason alone. I myself fell prey to this, so I wanted to give you some warning if you haven't played the game yourself. Moving on. Once you complete all 3 of those locations, it's then the game opens up to you. You'll have your own ship, the Ebon Hawk, to take to those other planets in the order of your choosing. Those worlds are made in the same way the first 2 worlds are, allowing you to travel around the location at your leisure. Only a few areas may be restricted to you at one point or another throughout these visits. I mean, it's kind of hard to be allowed unrestricted access to a Sith base when you're not a Sith, right? Whatever world you choose to go to, you can also leave it whenever you want and go somewhere else. You're not stuck there, unless you can't get back to your ship for whatever reason. There's only 4 of these worlds at this point in the game. Kashyyyk, home world of the Wookiees, Manaan, a neutral world with heavily sought after healing items for everyone, Tatooine, yes, the same Tatooine from the movies, just way in the past, and Korriban, a world filled with energy from the dark side that the Sith gravitate toward. There are technically 2 other locations you can fly to at this time. One of them is the space station around a world called Yavin. There's an inventive merchant there who will expand his inventory each time you visit him after completing each main quest beat on one of the 4 worlds. I recommend visiting him every chance you get, as you'll further his story, as well as unlock some of the best items in the game, costly as they are. The other location is the second planet that you're immediately railroaded to after leaving the first world. A Jedi Academy is here with its own Jedi Council. It's here that you'll become a Jedi through a montage and other tests, getting your own lightsaber in the process. While you are forced into it regardless of your decisions, who doesn't want to be a space wizard? These 2 locations exist at this point in the game, but both are not needed anymore for the main story. You can go to them should you wish, but we're going to keep moving on. You'll still come across a couple of other companions on your travels. Companions like droids, a mercenary, a young scoundrel, and yes, another Jedi. This Jedi happens to be the greatest character in the game. No other character even comes close.
Ooh, destiny.
His name is Jolee Bindo, and you'll find him on Kashyyyk of all places. Jolee is amazing and I love him. He's so sarcastic and his voice actor does an incredible job with his lines.
You deserve to be locked up in the cell for disobeying orders.
Yes, I deserve to be locked up for disobeying orders. What just happened? What am I doing in here? Damn you, old man. I'll kill you if I ever get out of here.
Then I'll be sure to never let you out. Goodbye, Sonny.
He's like that old uncle that keeps his distance only far enough away from you to keep an eye on you. All that while being quick and snappy with his remarks. He's actually great. Companions are a huge part to this game. While some will be more important to the main quest than others, they're essentially your personal ragtag group of friends, all going to punch the big guy on the Emperor's throne. Classic journey or anime trope. So much so that they'll interject themselves into conversations you're having.
Vibroblades and blasters, and nobody ever dies. How come I get the feeling you're trying to take us for a ride?
As well as just stopping you from going somewhere to chat with the other companion in your party.
Hey, Bastila, you ever use the Force just for fun? You know, a little jolt of the Force to trip up some jerk who's ticking you off?
I would never use the Force for such petty and trivial revenge. The mere thought of it's preposterous.
Oh, come on. There's gotta be times when you thought about it. Don't be so stuck up. You can tell me.
This adds more personality to not only them, but to the setting as well. You get to see who these people really are, and they're written in some really convincing and realistic ways. When I say the game has personality, I mean it. The scene that really sold the game to me, and sent me spiraling into a deep dive of the lore and characters of Star Wars, was on Taurus. There's a cantina in a less than friendly area that you'll stumble upon eventually. In there's a scene that plays as you walk far enough in.
Go away.
Kipuna! Kavatumpa kulpaiya mokapaata! Chiyoka kutumpa kulpaiya!
One.
Oscar! Kiska Nichu! Kahupa Botenia no
Kipuna! Kavatumpa kulpaiya mukapata!
Two.
Kiyokaku, Kimba Mulira Bonaji, Kuyami, Juski, Chika Nai, Uba Baska Dwana Chichopa Muska, Jiska da Soki, Kupa Bona na Chachu.
Tune Pudu, Rananu Prata Doko Shirkasha, Jum Apike.
Three.
It was at this moment that I was sold on Star Wars. Why this in particular? I honestly have no idea, but it happened and I'm all for it. So I've touched on the main quest a little bit. Not in what you're doing, just that it exists. This is a Star Wars game that, surprise surprise, takes place in the Star Wars universe. Because of this, the Sith exist as well. 9 times out of 10, the Sith take on an antagonistic role. So here's a very quick summarization of what the main quest boils down to. You, after performing a daring rescue at the beginning of the game for a Jedi companion named Bastila, then show up to Dantooine to learn how to become a Jedi. Once that's finished, you're then set upon the path of finding these MacGuffins called star maps on the various planets in the system. Find all of them, and they'll show you to where something called the Star Forge is located. And you're doing all of this to stop Darth Malak, current Dark Lord of the Sith. All this while you receive dreams at night pointing you along your path. Visions even, that you and Bastila share for some unknown reason. Well, now that the stage is set, let's continue. As I said before, it doesn't matter which order you visit the worlds. However, after you find your 3rd star map, you'll be captured by the Sith while in transit to somewhere else. Now this game has been around for a long while. Because of that, the twist in the story is already very well known. So well known in fact, that it's only preceded by Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father. Darth Revan, the previous Dark Lord to the Sith before Malak, is dead. All we know about them is they wore a mask, were very strong in the Force, and perished in combat. However, it's here, on the Sith ship, the Leviathan, that we find out that we ourselves are Darth Revan. Just a huge case of the amnesias. All those visions you received about Bastila confronting Darth Revan? Yeah, those were just memories of your past. Oh, what a twist! When I went into KOTOR, I already knew about this reveal. That was spoiled to me long ago, but I didn't know the hows and the whys. That was something I could experience for the first time. One of the main reasons I wanted to try the game out finally after all these years. And I'll tell you, since I already knew about the twist, I can see it with the hindsight of that knowledge. BioWare didn't exactly go out of their way to hide it. They purposefully wanted to leave a breadcrumb trail so things would make sense, whether you could piece the twist together yourself or not. Even right at the reveal itself, BioWare put a video cutscene showing all the major hints to you being Darth Revan. Heck, they even name all 4 worlds that you visit, even if you haven't touched the 4th one yet. Considering you have this happen between worlds 3 and 4, it's likely you didn't. There's one part that stuck out to me though, one that really seemed out of left field. Something that just felt so on the nose, and it was at the very beginning of the game. After you escape the Endar Spire, you wake up on Taurus in an abandoned apartment. Karth is the one who dragged you there after being unconscious for a couple of days. Right after you awaken, you start conversing with him. It's one of the things he says about the Force in particular that just feels so strange to just place randomly in a conversation. Here's the clip.
Good idea. We can use this abandoned apartment as a base. We can probably get some equipment and supplies here in the upper city. Just remember to keep a low profile. I've heard some grim stories about the Dark Jedi interrogation techniques. They say the Force can do terrible things to a mind. Can wipe away your memories and destroy your very identity. But I figure if we don't do anything stupid, we should be okay. I mean, after all, they're looking for Bastila, not a couple of grunts like us. All right, soldier, let's move out.
You see, it's so on the nose, I have to wonder if it could have been done a bit more subtly than that. Like seriously, whose first conversation with someone about the Force is about how Jedi can use the Force to change people and erase memories? Just seemed very convenient. That being said, I do wonder, had I not already known about the twist, would I have been able to piece it all together still? Hard to say. In an alternate universe, I'd like to say that I still didn't figure it out and was surprised by the end. Who knows? So after the whole captured by the Sith in space debacle, Bastila herself is captured by the Sith in an attempt to let you escape Darth Malak since he showed up for the twist reveal. Now that we're past that, it's on to the final of the 4 worlds. Essentially, the last world you chose to wait on. This is where the connectivity of the game's writing comes into play. Now that your character knows the truth of who they used to be, there's added dialogue for certain scenes that you can choose for the final world. That means each world's story was written in a way that can be told before or after the reveal. That's not to say it's very hard to do that, since Revan is considered by all to be long dead. It's hard to convince people that you are Revan yourself. So because of that, most of these added lines are throwaway dialogue. But even with that, they add more flavor to the world as well as the story you take part in. It's not like the twist reveal meant nothing right afterward. This gives you more connection to the story, and I like it. I did choose Korriban as my final planet though, since I was told there were some Jedi hunting monsters there. Figured it was more of a late game world to go to. Turns out the game has some sort of scaling system based on your level, so you can go to Korriban first if you so wished. Regardless, it was the Sith affiliated world, so I enjoyed the added dialogue options of saying I'm Darth Revan, even if nobody believed me. After you find the final star map, it's onward to the end game. With the location of the Star Forge revealed to you, and Bastila is still gone, it's time to take the fight to the Sith themselves. Except once you arrive, there's some sort of electric field that causes your ship to have to land on a nearby planet, protections for the Star Forge and whatnot. Just before you have to land, Karth sends a tip of the location of the Star Forge to the Republic fleet. Stranded on this unknown world, you have to explore it and find a way to get your ship airborne again, as well as shut off that protective barrier so the Republic fleet doesn't meet their end helplessly. It's pretty high stakes at this point. All the makings of being the final stretch of the story. Go do what you need to do, find out that Bastila has switched to the dark side and retreated to the Star Forge. Now you head there yourself. Dear God, this place sucks. There's a seemingly endless amount of enemies that keep spawning in and beelining it straight to you and your party. It's constant combat with high-level enemies. A lot of Dark Jedi that can resist your force powers and your allies going off towards pretty much every enemy they see immediately. It's pretty bad. Definitely difficult for the final zone of the game. But then, you eventually come up to Darth Malak himself. It's a one-on-one battle between you and him. Revan versus Malak. Master versus apprentice. He betrayed you before, but you're a changed person now. Take him on and come out victorious. Cue the ending cutscenes and credits. The ending section of the game itself felt the same when you were on the unknown world, but once you got to the Star Forge, it felt a bit rushed. Everything looked the same, the enemies were relentless, and eventually you get to where you needed to go. It felt more like a hassle being there than it was fun to go through. Sure, it was the final zone, and it needed to be the hardest, but holy hell, was it just non-stop combat. It was rare that I could go even a few minutes of being able to replenish my force meter enough before the next engagement. It was rough, but overall, the whole package of the game was great, while still dated. While the graphics and gameplay don't hold up very well today, the story, dialogue, and choices with consequences were great. I can see why the game is held in such high regard. This whole playthrough was on the light side of the Force, but now that I beat the game, what if I told you I then did a dark side playthrough? Let's get into how that differs from the light side. So while you can align yourself with the light side or the dark side, the game is going to start the exact same way. You're still on a ship called the Endar Spire while it's under attack. Nothing here has really changed in any way. It's really just the dialogue you choose that changes what you do. Sometimes. While there are quite a few similarities in the story beats regardless of what you choose, you do get options to be evil in various ways. Times where you can save people, leading to light side points, you can now do the opposite. Those people you let go before, you can now cut them down in cold blood. All the while, your allies will have some choice things to say about your actions. Who is for or against what you decide to do is dependent on their alignment with light and dark, not to mention who they are as people and their personalities. It's interesting to see what they'll say sometimes, and nothing really ruffles their feathers quite like dark side responses.
I'm glad somebody finally said what we've all been thinking.
Are you mad? They will slaughter each other.
No, don't!
They'll even comment on your actions should you use Jedi mind control for monetary gain. It's great.
The Force should not be used for profit and personal gain. As Jedi, we should be above such things.
But again, the game mostly has some surface level decisions you make between light and dark. I say this because most of the time, it's really inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. Not many things really affect the main quest, even directly. It's even fairly rare that you'll find something that affects even side quests to a major extent. Even the ones that do have a more dark side outcome won't go any further than that. Don't get me wrong, there are quests that do connect to each other in various ways with what you say and do. They're just fewer and farther between. That's not to say nothing has consequences of sort. Let's use Kashyyyk as an example. Depending on whether you make light side or dark side decisions will determine who runs the planet and how. There's a definitive ending there that changes based on what you decide. But while that does have its changes, it's not like it changes any other outcome in any meaningful way. That's where the Kashyyyk story ends. Think of it like this. Each planet has its own story. The only connecting point between each of them is the main quest driving you to search for those star maps. The way the star maps connect is you typically find them while doing the story of the planet itself. It's sort of like a win-win in a transactional sense. You're looking for the star map. However, in order to reach the star map, you have to help out the locals in something. That's the only way they connect. Your main objective just happens to be on the way. There's nothing wrong with this. I'm just going over this to show you how little things end up influencing each other, whether you choose light or dark choices. The main differences come with the third act of the game. Act 1 begins with the attack on the Endar Spire and ends when you gain free reign of your ship. Act 2 starts there and ends once you have the location of the Starforge unlocked. Act 3 is that point to the end of the game. Act 3 is where your choices will matter in meaningful ways. Having your allies stand by your side, or having to cut them down in your path to power, what determines who you can bring with you into the Starforge, whether or not Bastila runs or joins you. The ability to save Bastila, take her with you to the Starforge, or end her on the Starforge. All of these have meaning and influence your playthrough from that point on. Even the ending of the game is based on if you're more oriented with the light side or the dark side. Do you have your medal ceremony in a similar ending to A New Hope? Or do you take on your old mantle of Dark Lord and control the Sith once again? Everything up to Act 3 is essentially setting your character up to be who you want to be, as well as flavoring their personality. Act 3 is where the accumulation of all your light side or dark side points will come into play. While I very much enjoyed the story and personality the game has to offer, I was actually disappointed in the lack of major differences between light and dark. Most of the game is pretty much the same going through. You still have all of the same events, just with slightly different outcomes. I think it's the lack of connectivity between the planets and side quests that leads to this outcome. It's not perfect, but that also doesn't mean it's bad. There is incentive of doing multiple playthroughs of the game. It's just not quite as strong as something that's more connected like Fallout New Vegas, to give an example. In New Vegas, they not only have a lot of different things connecting in different ways, but they also have a reputation system. That reputation takes those connections between main and side quests even further and really makes the Mojave feel like a living, breathing place. In KOTOR's defense here, considering everything is on different planets means it's a bit harder to have things connect. If your solar system's apart from a planet that has a catastrophe, it makes sense if you didn't hear about it. It's not on the same map. It's not like it happened next door to your house or down the street. This part does add some credence to the lack of connection points in the side quests, but I still feel it would have benefited more from having those connections still. Overall, I enjoyed both the light side and dark side playthroughs. They both offer different outcomes to various quest lines, as well as the occasional non-consequential dialogue option. They both are similar yet different experiences. While the variations aren't as many as I would have hoped for, there's still enough variance to say each playthrough is unique from each other. The story and narrative are superbly done. The writers should be proud of their work, from the characters and their interactions to the story beats in various quests. This game is a fantastic experience and, honestly, a seemingly great way to turn someone like me into more of a Star Wars fan as a whole. Given more time, I have no doubt this game could have reached even higher heights in that department. What we have here is a testament to the quality of BioWare from 2 decades ago. And that's the overall game in a nutshell. It's got its ups and downs, but that can be attributed to the time the game was made. The gameplay and art style won't hold up, but they do add that charm that older games have. The story and narrative are the main selling points here, since most of the time that people talk about KOTOR, it's about these aspects. I really enjoyed the game and what it had to offer. Since doing 2 full playthroughs, I can safely say that I'm fine not playing it again. For now, the game does have its hold over me, so I can see myself coming back to it in time. Maybe just a long enough wait to where things feel fresh again. I wanted to get to this game finally when they announced the KOTOR remake. Things for that got a little hairy when it was shown to be moving developers, as well as Embracer Group laying off and closing studios left and right. A rumor is that since Saber Interactive bought its freedom from Embracer Group, they are apparently still working on the remake. The dream is not over, everyone. We can still have 2 cakes. Very curious to see how they go about it though. Curious to see if they go the more Blue Point route and remake the game to a T with better graphics, or if they go the path of Final Fantasy VII Remake, essentially making it a reimagining of KOTOR with the same overall story beats, but done bigger and flashier with new content and gameplay to boot. a lot of possibilities here. Even if Saber goes the Final Fantasy VII Remake route and it somehow ends up worse than the original, that's not to say the original disappeared. It's still there, in all its 2003 glory, just ready to pick up and play. Now that I've finished with this game, I can tell you it's pretty hard to not just dive straight into the sequel, Knights of the Old Republic 2. The main point of curiosity I have is this sequel wasn't actually made by BioWare. This was made by Obsidian Entertainment, another studio of some pedigree. Definitely curious to see the differences in approach between the two studios, as well as their writing styles. Not to mention, I've heard quite a few times where people say their favorite game of the two is the second one. A lot to look forward to, I see. With all that said, that's my video essay of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. This one has taken quite a while to make, but I have so many more videos on the way. Just need to start them up and keep rolling. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Adios.